Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Where's Your Heart? We appreciate you guys tuning in on this Monday evening slash afternoon slash early night.
Depending on your time zone.
Depending on your time zone. It's Torian here, and we are here with the Royce, a man 20 grand, who is rocking his science shirt. Tell me a little bit about that, man.
Uh, I'm so tired of people trying to make policy based on their beliefs. And the shirt just says science doesn't care what you believe. Like, gravity won't stop working just because you don't believe in it. Climate change is not going to go away just because you don't believe in it. Like, there you go.
Yeah, I understand.
I
I
did my
understand.
sharing thing. Look at that. Just a
Sharon?
reminder to everybody to share the stream to wherever, check it out on YouTube. Our stuff's going to be shifting on YouTube. It sounds like we're going to shift over to Where's Your Heart Live instead of Where's Your Heart 2020.
This is
Uh,
correct.
so we're doing some rebranding and stuff and kind of cleaning up stuff and ready for a website launch hopefully soon.
It's coming.
It's coming. So lots of fun, awesome stuff. But in the meantime, we really do count on our listeners to share the stream, start a watch party, do something fun with it, share it to groups that you like. Just yeah, jump into the conversation.
Please.
And please do comment. Last week, one of the biggest concerns that we heard from people was that we didn't address enough comments. And
It's true.
I felt that because I was watching the thing go by. I'm like, oh my God, there's so many good comments there. But I'm too busy like, blah. All right. So I guess I need to acknowledge that too as a host. Like
Yeah.
I feel like last week I dropped the ball as a host. I feel like I
Why?
was not in a space of vulnerability. I felt like I was in a space of well, I guess I'll start right there. I have a lot of gratitude around it for the week of just being able to process what last week's show was like. It hurt a lot. It was very frustrating. I know it was for our guest Eric too, um, and it had a lot to do. Oh my gosh, Laney and John, good to see you guys. They're more church members
Aha.
from Sarah's church. We're
Perfect.
having a guest of Sarah's church on today on the show. So anyway, it's blah blah blah. Anyway, last week, so once I became aware that I had white privilege and trying to figure out, okay, so what do I do with this? Because I don't like to exercise my privilege, but I also know that I don't like the challenge of privilege, the trap of privilege is even if you choose not to participate in it, that's a privilege,
Okay.
right? Like
Okay.
not having privilege, you can't be like, well, I'm going to exercise my privilege now. No, you don't have it. It's tough shit.
Right.
Get out.
Right.
Um, and it's not that's a generalization. It's not absolutely true. Yada yada yada. We all have some level of like something that we're operating with, but it's a mini example. And so ever since I really became aware of that, like that's how it was operating, I also became aware of like the conversations and spaces where I pass. I pass
What?
as a cis het white male,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And so people will make like low key racist comments,
Mhm.
and I'm supposed to like let it pass. And people make low key sexist comments, and well, not other people. Sometimes I'm the one that has done these things,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's okay on a bunch of white men, right? Quote unquote. It was never okay. It was wrong. Um, and so I've had to like, really rethink how I behave in those spaces and how I learn how to say to other white men, that's bullshit. You can't fucking say it. Um, and I was very much in that space last week, and it did not lead to a good experience for our guest. It didn't, I don't think, led to a good experience for our audience. It certainly wasn't a good experience for me. So, and afterwards, Torian, you had some great comments about like, I really want us to be this way as hosts. And I think that's um, absolutely true. So, we're gonna have to try some. I'm gonna have to try some things differently, and I think I'm gonna have to learn to trust our audience. That even if I'm not calling out every stupid thing that that we say on the show, like that it's okay, and that it doesn't mean I'm condoning it either. Because
Well,
that's the problem. White silence is violence. We've all heard that catchphrase, and it's absolutely true.
well, I think it's important one for you to give yourself some grace.
See, and there's the
It's
gratitude.
well, it is, and that is my gratitude. I mean, it is grace. It's for me being able to give myself grace, and then give that to others. And it's just like everything else in life. We can't give to others what we don't first have for ourselves. We can't be generative in any way unless we have that attribute. So, there's a lot going on right now. It's a highly stressful time right now. Um, the catchphrases and the topics and the things that are being generated and all of the information sources are actually designed to help trigger a lot of that. And
Yeah.
we have to acknowledge that in our conversations as well. But I do think it's important for us, like you kind of mentioned, that as people, as men, as human beings who want to actually create spaces where people feel comfortable, we're championing, we're supporting, we're advocating for vulnerability to help to grow into other things, that we have to model that too, you know.
Yeah.
And so when it gets scratchy for us, that's I think that's when we have an even more awesome responsibility to hold that space for everybody. So that's how I always want to show up. But anyway, it was a great show, man. I mean, I think it sparked a lot of conversation. We're referring to last week, the topic
Yeah.
of last week, just to give listeners and viewers who may not have been a part of the show some context. Our topic was MAGA, making America great again, or make America great again. Um, and so, we had someone on who was defending their stance around it or why they believe it. So um, it's scratchy, but I do think the more we can create the most out of what we have and open some space up, man, it'll be better. Because I think a lot of people, everybody's hurting right now. I'm
Yeah.
tired and my soul is a little bit exhausted just from talking about things all the time and working with clients and stuff like that, because it does take a piece of you as well. So, again, I want to be gracious right now and talk about gratitude because, giving myself grace and giving grace onto others is really what I'm grateful for. So,
Yeah.
yeah, man.
And Janine's chiming in. The Boys in the Hood shirt. It's all up
I
there.
got Janine, Boys in the Hood shirt. That's right. I love Ice Cube, man. It's one of my favorite movies.
Mm,
One of my favorite movies. So we had a lot happening last week, my brother. What are your what's
mm.
top of mind for what was going on around the world? Sound like a news show now.
Yeah. No, I mean, top of mind for me at least
Yeah.
is like I just see everything in our society right now is being toward a some kind of conflict politically, and I hope to God it's not war. But I don't know how we unfuck this system right now. Like, so Republicans are going to appoint a new Supreme Court justice, even
Mhm.
though they stonewalled Obama's for a year. Um, Even though they stonewalled what 300, 400 of his his judge nominations,
Mhm.
so that Trump could just stack the courts with whack jobs. Not all of them are whack jobs, but um, and so what are the ramifications of that? Because if the Democrats decide they're going to come back from the other side, they'll just say, "Fine, we're not going to have a 9-seat Supreme Court, and we're
Mhm.
just going to add more seats to the Supreme Court." Well, that's an endless phase of stupid. Like that's not going to go anywhere good. It's going to take a constitutional amendment to unfuck that. It's going to take a constitutional amendment to get rid of the electoral college, which has to be done. Um, I just like I'm looking at the whole thing and I'm just seeing it driven further and further and further into conflict, and I don't see anybody. I don't see a way to like break that. I guess is my frustration, my concern.
You don't think
Um,
it'll break itself?
well, it will, but when this system breaks itself, it's going to be violent because this system is a violent system. It's war built system, even though wars shouldn't exist anymore. Like we
No,
internationally, like we all have a vested interest in peace at this point. Like
I know I do.
we go to war with China, we're not going to be able to have like you're going to walk into the grocery store, there's not going to be shit there. Like, let's be really clear. Like it's not going to be good. Like we can't afford to be going to war anymore. Um, so I don't know. Do you see what I mean? Like I just don't. There's a new
I
world is on
do.
the brink here.
I
Like
do. I think I. So my view is this, right? Like diamonds are created under pressure.
it's true.
Okay, and that's how I look at it. I look at it. I just feel like we're at a tipping point. Yes, there are a lot of
Yeah.
uncomfortable things happening, I
Yep.
feel it every single day, which is what I was alluding to before when we were talking about gratitude. But I also, as much as I feel like I'm falling down a bottomless pit, I also know that at some point I'm gonna pop out of the other side.
Yeah.
And so it's how do you manage those dualities? This is my truth, right? How do I
Yeah.
manage those dualities as I'm dealing with a lot of different things? Um, because there's a lot of opportunity and ways to innovate that are going to happen right now. We're going to have a conversation today that we kind of mentioned on the pre-show, but
Yeah.
I've never shared space with three heterosexual white males that are leading a conversation amongst themselves about race in
Yeah.
all my years. So I'm excited just about this show, and it's our show, and we do it every week. But just to be able to be in this conversation
Yeah.
because I've never felt that. So these are the kind of things that for me, I'm like,
Mm,
hey, this is how we can
there's
be
the hope.
better going forward. That's the hope on my side.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, man, yeah. So
So I see Penny tuning in too. She's tossing a smiley face
few
out there.
comments.
Thank you, Penny. Good to see
Hey,
you.
Penny, one of the regular listeners.
So we're so yeah, I mean, yeah. I I think you're right. I also think TL asked, I can't remember if I mentioned this last week. He asked, so how do we like write a new constitution? And I've been noodling on this question ever since he asked it. I think it was an online like on Facebook conversation.
Right.
But that like I think that pops out for me is I want to see a constitutional convention for this country that has a limit on white men and a limit on
Okay.
income. Like there can't be more than 10 millionaires in the group. There can't be more than, of the 100 people, it can't have more than 10 millionaires in that group. Or
Right.
maybe 3 or 4 because population wise it should reflect the rest of the country or something. But I just like I don't want white men dominating that space. Like no, sorry. You had your chance. You moved you took a step forward, but we'll see.
Right.
Um Scott's on here too again. Good to see you,
What's
Scott.
that?
So anyway, yeah, there's a lot there.
What's up,
I'm
Saul?
excited. Excited. Yeah, and Saul's out there. Um, yeah, yep. So that's what we're doing today. Torian, he's like, I think it's time for the conversation.
It's
I
time for
run
the
a
conversation, man. It's just like talking to the teenager about the conversation. It is
yep,
time for the conversation. Since how you and I met, we've been talking about your work, your passion, how you frame it, in killing the great white male. And so, just like a lot of phrases that are out there right now, even that phrase in itself can be triggering for a lot of people. They can
yep,
hear it, and even though you said it, or even though we're about to talk about it for the next 40 plus minutes, they're not going to want to hear anything we have to say because of those 5 words.
yeah,
But I think that's the mistake that we make, and because I want to know. This is why I want to have this show, and we're going to continue to have it. Like, what does that actually mean? Because I don't know what it
yeah,
means. What does it mean to you? But what I do think to be true is that if you want to make it impactful and define it in whatever way you want to, the conversation has to be with you amongst your peers,
yep,
and that's the exciting part for me, you know.
yeah. And
So
I mean, it's exciting to me because I've been doing this work like kind of quietly for years now. Um, and I'm in the midst of a book write on the topic.
mhm.
And then I'm hoping to start a PhD on the topic. So it's like, it really is my life's work. But I also, like, I hope that it matters. But there's also that part of me that's like, really doesn't expect anybody to ever want to
Why?
engage it.
Why?
Because I mean, part of that's just my self-esteem bullshit, but part of it's also like it is tough. Like the notion that so here's the in a nutshell, killing the great white male is making an argument for the end of privilege for the most privileged and saying that those of us who are white men, maybe not the most privileged, but we do like white men have a lot of privilege in our country. Um, I'm making the argument that we have something to gain by the end of that system that creates that privilege. We have a lot to gain. In fact, I would argue we have more to gain than we have to gain from staying in this system.
Mm,
We have more to gain from the end of privilege, from the end of whiteness, from the end of male privilege, from the end of hetero privilege. Which I mean, we constantly use the term hetero. I'm not actually hetero. Um, uh,
I
uh,
did use that. Sorry.
yeah, no, I use it too because people think I am because I'm married to a woman,
Right.
right?
True. Yeah.
Um, but the fact is, I'm more probably bi or pan. I've loved men. Um, so it's what and plus like and since I've been with Sarah, I've come to a whole different understanding of my friends who are trans and things. So yeah. So anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But there's the like challenge I think that we're faced with is how do
Mm,
we have a topic? How do we have a conversation about ending our privilege that is actually motivated not I see white men being good allies a lot lately. And I'm so fucking yay, right? The protests across the country are part of that. But I think the only way we actually begin to undo this is if we as white men can name what we have to gain by ending the system of privilege.
mm.
That's where this comes from. That's where I think white men should be leading the charge to kill white male privilege because we have so much to gain when it dies.
Okay.
Um, and it's
And
complex.
it is very complex. And one of the things that's been curious to me, right before we kind of introduce our guests, so we can talk
Yeah,
about this
yeah.
holistically, is there are people who don't believe that there is a such thing as white male privilege, right? So how do you start to have a conversation to level set?
Yep.
Because if we can't level set on certain things, like we need air to live, water is nice for the human body, just basic things, we can't grow anything from it. So that's why I want to dig deep into it with this conversation that we're going to have today. So let me just,
And that's
sorry.
well, I mean, that's actually a very important point for me, is that I'm still really learning that for somebody to engage in the project of killing the great white male, there has to be an acknowledgement that white male privilege exists.
Hmm,
Prior to that point, it's a whole different conversation. And I frankly liken it to having a conversation with an addict who doesn't know that it's killing them. Um, because it's a conversation that's not about trying to convince the head. It's a conversation about being present heart to heart. That was something you mentioned this week that really clicked for me, that I have to do more of when I'm working with people who don't acknowledge that they have privilege.
hmm,
Um, and so today on our show, folks, we're having normal white men, what I would call normal white men on the show. They neither of them knows really what this topic is. They were like, really? Okay. I mean, I'll have a good conversation. I don't know what this is. Um, uh, so but they do have that crucial point of that they know that privilege exists and that they probably have it, and so that's the kind of conversation that we're having today. um and Scott and Janine are chiming out like, yeah, you're right there. The more people we bring to the table, the better off we all are. And yeah, Janine, admitting that it's a problem is is the first step. um so there we go. Should we I
keep
want to
rolling,
say
bro.
one thing.
Go
All
ahead and
right,
keep
so
rolling, and then you got
well,
Pat.
okay, so for our guests, because we got to bring them in here. We're at 20 after. I was looking over. They sent in information about themselves. I was shocked to see the same, like almost. It was a very similar response from both of them when
Mm,
they talked about one particular question in our thing, and is that they both cared more about how they showed up in this space, in being authentic, in being present, than they cared about pushing an agenda. And I thought that was like that gave me pause,
mm.
um personally. So yeah, we're about to have, for the first time on our show, we're going to have three white men in the room on the show. So there you go, folks. We're going
You
to have
got it,
this.
man. You can bring
uh,
in our first guest.
all right. So as I was trying to find people who could have this conversation, my spouse suggested one of her parishioners, a gentleman that the more she told me about him, he spent some time more on the conservative end of the spectrum religiously, and has done like he just has lived a very real life, and he's an older gentleman too. So I respect the fact that he's willing to engage in this conversation. Like, I don't know what I'm going to be like when I'm 70 or 80, but I'm not sure I'm going to give two fucks about what's going on. Like, so anytime I meet somebody who is older than I am and who really wants to be engaged in stuff, I'm like, I gotta meet this guy. So that's Pat. Let's
Hey,
get Pat Gore in here.
Dr. Gore. How you doing, Pat?
Hello.
All right. And so I'll bring in our second guest real quickly so we can go ahead and get the conversation started. So our second guest, friend of mine, brother, we spent time together in China, in Beijing. We graduated from Tsinghua University in a similar program at different times, though. And he was one of the first people that I met, but he really kind of helped me find my way around. You know, it's kind of that American comfort that I needed a little bit at first, anyway. But then, you know, we developed a brotherhood around a lot of other things, including just, you know, how we wanted to show up on this planet. So I've always had him in the back of my mind to do things with. We tried to do some stuff in China, probably do stuff in the future. But when we started talking about this, I said, I know someone who can hold this space in a non-toxic way and in a critical way, you know, to ask questions and dig a little bit deeper outside of just what something sounds like or what, you know, what a phrase is like. So with that, bring in my brother, Mike Brewer. What's up, man?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Hello, Internet. All of you.
All of you. So I forgot to tell Pat and Mike, if over on the right side of your screen, if you click on comments, you can see the comments that are coming in from Facebook and YouTube. So if there's a particular comment that you want us to dive into, just let us know and Torian can pop it up on the screen so we can all see it and chew on it together.
Yeah.
So in another first, I accidentally asked a question that in our pre-session that I realized partway through their responses, I'm like, oh God, this actually should be the opening question today. So we're actually going to re-ask what we talked about in the pre-discussion. And that's, when did you guys discover that you had white male privilege? Or how did it come to your mind? Or tell the story. Have some fun with it.
Well, I think I first came to recognize the concept was through reading White Fragility. Personally, as I reflect back on my life, I think I've always had it and probably exploited it to as much as I could. Just in general, I think that most everything that's happened in my life has been primarily because I'm male and I'm white and I'm fairly well educated.
Yeah. Hey, me too. I'm right with you.
I can't say the same. Can't say that, fellas. I can't even say it. I can't say that one. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm going to cut you off.
I love it.
So yeah, for mine, I guess, you know, growing up in a, you know, very white suburban kind of setting, it just wasn't really, it never clicked to me for a long time growing up. And then it was really kind of traveling a little bit, going out of state, and then seeing, for me, as I mentioned to the guys, it was seeing like a blonde lady being like the road worker instead of what I would traditionally see as like, you know, a Mexican guy doing it. And then it really like clicked to me. It was like, oh, we've got this like just massive division. That's a little bit more in terms of labor. But then especially, you know, Torian and I share the China experience, and it was even more prevalent over there, where it was like, you know, bonus points for being a white guy. And it just felt very odd and very, very, very inappropriate. And that was just like the standard way to doing business.
So you're
you
saying these bonus points were different than they were in the United States? Is that what you're saying? It felt different?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like then it was real privilege where, I mean, like in terms of like, I mean, getting a job, right? You want to be like an English teacher and make a little bit of coin. You're going to make more money as a white guy or a white girl, like for sure. It's just, you know, that's kind of fact of doing business out there. And I don't condone it, but I benefited from it, right? Like I definitely benefited from that. And even, you know, without having like, I didn't go out of my way. I wasn't trying to leverage that. It's just the way that system was set up. Right. And so, and even, you know, in my current stage of life, like, I mean, I don't necessarily feel overtly white privileged. But then when I, look at kind of like the world around me, it's definitely set up to favor guys like me because, the rules were created by guys who check the same boxes that I check. Right. So yeah, that's my spiel.
That's the spiel. So I mean, so we've landed on the topic of whiteness. Torian, you have a question you always ask me.
Oh, no, I don't have a question now. I'm taking it all in right now.
All right. Well, Torian loves to ask me, like, so what does whiteness actually mean to you? Like, break down what it is. Is it, yeah. What is whiteness? What does it mean to be white?
So if you're doing initial reactions,
yeah,
to me, you say white, I think conservative. That's my knee-jerk reaction.
Huh.
Okay.
Well, I just think a predominant group in the society. I think that numerically there are more Caucasian folks here in the United States, and so technically, I don't think there's any rational reason for race itself, but I do think it's something that you can observe, and so there's a process of differentiating one set of human beings from another set. So in that sense, there is a subset that's white or Caucasian or whatever.
Yeah. And it's always an interesting topic for me because it hit me in the gut when I was doing clinical pastoral education, doing a chaplaincy, and I had to do these case studies. So I had to and to do the case study, you had to disclose all your bias and details up at the top. And then their ethnicity, I was always we don't know, because I didn't know my dad's, we knew my mom was Pennsylvania Dutch, so very German, very white, so to speak. My dad's family, we honestly didn't know. My great aunt had taken the family name to the grave because they changed their name when they immigrated. And so then we found out later on they were from the Azores. They were a Portuguese colony. So there's always been this weird aspect for me around race, because it was always this element of we're kind of Latino-ish maybe, but we're also very white, and so it was a wrestling act, and it so there is this challenge of whiteness because it's not actually our skin color. If you look at the three of us on the screen here, we have very different skin tones, So white is not a fucking skin tone any more than black is a skin tone. It's
right, and that's
bullshit, right?
And so yeah, and so I agree. So my question is what's the construct around it then? Because we know it's not so. If I were to give you my words when I think of them, when I think of white, I think of control. That's what comes to my mind. That's neutral for me. It's not necessarily bad or good, but that is the word that I would associate with white. Now, when I think of black, I think of resilient or perseverance. Wow. And that's just my candid. These are the words that come up. It might be associated with race. It could be associated with all these different constructs. So, it's different because when you were describing where you were, I've never been able to disguise my skin color.
Yep.
Right. So it's interesting, but anyway, I don't want to hijack this conversation.
Can I ask you to elaborate on that? When you say control, are you talking about kind of physical threat of violence control, or institutional systemic policy wise, or
just it's hard to explain. And again, it's not a derogatory word. It's just my experience has been I have to figure out how to navigate control. Right. And that's the visual association that comes with it. Whether it's good, whether it's relational, whether it's, something I feel like I may have to take, which I've never really felt like I had to do. But it's this kind of a grappling with it. And then black, because I guess I would associate with that word per se. Yeah, I think of resilient. I mean, my whole life has been this mental picture and narrative around, push through because it'll be better tomorrow. Push through, or I'll make it better tomorrow. That it went from it will be better to I will make it better, and that's when it became more of an empowering thing. But the basis of the narrative was still push through it, so you can make it so tomorrow can be better than it is today.
Wow.
When I think of white,
Hmm.
I think of eugenics,
Mm.
and I'm not supporting it or anything like that, but I'm just saying that seems to be a predominant kind of thing that goes on in whiteness. It just tends to be think of ourselves as being superior. We're going to be guardians of those folks who are not the white, and all that kind of stuff that's associated with that. And it's very hard to, it's been ingrained almost in people like me. And it's a very challenging kind of thing to recognize it and to push back against it and not be drawn in to that kind of an idea.
So let me be the contrarian here.
Okay.
There are plenty of listeners that we have, plenty of people, regardless of race, that will say this doesn't exist. Like white male privilege does not exist. Like what, for the three of you all, what would be your response to them as colleagues or people that you could say you check the boxes against?
Okay, I'll give you an example. Really young, in the military. My job, part of what I was doing was doing background investigations in Baltimore. Okay, and a lot of people were applying for NSA jobs. So I would go into the ghetto of Baltimore by myself and conduct background investigations. Okay, I never, under any circumstances, felt threatened or afraid or anything. And as I reflect back on that, that was a sense of my white privilege. They just weren't going to mess with me. And I didn't, what I mean by that is I didn't go in with the idea that they weren't going to. It never even occurred to me that would be something that I'd be concerned about. But I mean, it was so, but if you had turned that around and had a man of color, Hispanic or black or whatever, and do that in a suburban environment, there's a different situation there.
Absolutely, there is. I've experienced that many times in my life. It feels a lot different.
Yeah, and it's something that is a person like yourself would be much more conscious of. And I'm just saying, as a white guy, didn't even occur to me. And I mean, there were several black young men on street corners, and it was just like they just completely left me alone. And that was during the 60s, like 69 and 70. We're not talking about a real. There was a lot of racial tension during that time, and I was just kind of oblivious in one sense to it. But that's how I reflect back on it. So if you're thinking about what that means, that's kind of a sense I have.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mike, do you have one?
Sorry, can you rephrase the question? I was busy listening. That was an interesting story.
Torian, you asked it. Like
well, I think the initial question was, weren't we just saying what is whiteness, or how do you describe it?
Well, no, it was more like. So, what do you say?
Oh, I'm sorry.
How
do you for someone that you would consider your colleague or another white male, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who says, listen, white male privilege doesn't exist. Like, how do you have that conversation? How do you have that dialogue as someone who believes that it does?
How do you articulate your privilege in that?
Yeah, I mean it's certainly a tough one. Like I think the fallback would be some sort of statistical proof, whether it's like callback rates from people with black sounding names or, the evidence is sort of overwhelming. So you can kind of pick and choose, but that's also the problem where it would really depend a lot on the person that you're talking to. If having evidence actually matters, right? Holding these opinions because like I felt when I was younger, because I had never seen with my own eyes or like really felt it. Like I didn't really know that the system was sort of stacked for me.
Yeah.
Right. So like it would be a tough, let's say, I mean, me and my younger self, right? Like, how do I tell my younger self, like, no, dude, like this, it exists and you benefit from it, even if you don't know about it. I would like to see what my reaction would be to that, my younger self. Right.
But we have to be able to facilitate. Well, I have been facilitating, but I'm speaking for you all as white men. We have to be able to facilitate that when it is tough. Like, again, if we go back to, like, for me, I don't think we talked about this on the pre-show. Like, there's never been a choice. Like, this is such an odd situation for me because I'm usually the center of either opinion and or presentation around race. And sitting on the sideline, like trying to spark the conversation with you all about how you have it amongst yourselves is pretty interesting because I'm like, I don't have a choice. I've never had a choice. So anyway, it's just interesting.
And I think that's the first thing to note. Like that was my boss's point in that moment with that case study. When he looked at me, he said, it doesn't matter whether you write white under race or not. He said, I don't really care. People see you and they assign you white privilege and you don't get to say no to it. Yeah. Like it really is that simple. And just like you don't get to choose to put on a mask that says I'm black now. We can't put on because our society is so racially biased. We can't put on a mask that says I'm white now. It just is assigned. And because it comes with privilege, it comes with power. And that's really messed up. That I think is one of the most important things about this. Whereas a lot of marginalized voices right now are learning to just discover who they are authentically, be able to own their own identity apart from the identities that our country puts on people. As white men, because we benefit from the whole thing, our process is automatically kind of disjointed on that topic because we have an internal conversation about who we are authentically, but then we also have this reality that we have to walk into every day. Does that land at all? I don't even know. Pat and Mike.
Well, yeah, and part of the struggle I have with it is that it often appears to be a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
So if I kill this great white male, then there's going to be some great Hispanic male or black male that's going to just come and take my place, or Asian, or
interesting.
Someone else besides me, essentially.
Yeah, and so yes. What I struggle with and what I have to kind of deal with is that it is not a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
That if I give up something, it doesn't necessarily mean I lose. And so, but our part of the system that I've been raised in is that oftentimes things are seen as a zero-sum. If you win, I've somehow lost.
Yeah.
And in convincing somebody that you're going to kill the great white male is going to be a really interesting activity.
Right.
Because
that's what I'm like, explain this to me, please. I want to know.
Yeah, because there's so many words in there that are, if you will, those trigger things. I mean, yes. Come on, killing.
Great.
Yeah, just and so I think that the conversation will hopefully get to a point where I will start to realize that if I give up some of this privilege or reassign the privilege or whatever, it's not going to hurt me. It's not going to lessen me, or in my case, my sons or my grandson, or on down the line. So that's the part that, and I'm fairly okay with it. There are going to be a lot of people, men, who are not okay with it.
Mm-hmm. And that's always kind of been my not concern, but my question. And I really appreciate that comment, Pat, because a lot of people don't feel as if they are exercising privilege. They're like, well, I'm not trying to be. It's just like that neutral space or that gray area. I'm not, and I'm not even equating those two with being racist, but the lack of awareness. Like, how do you spark that? That's what my real question. That's my question with a lot of things, but with something like this that could be so close to how a person identifies, how a person measures their life, how a person measures success in life. When you start to get close to those things for any of us as human beings, we want to push back, including Torian, right? For me, it's my sovereignty. Like when I start feeling boxed in, I'm like, whoa, right? So how do you start to bridge that gap? It's a big question.
So I'm maybe struggling a little bit with, can we kind of identify the great white male? I feel like that's really broad. Say, for example, like there's like, consider the difference between Donald Trump and his base, right? His base being like a lot of white men, right? Yes. I'm not going to call them great or anything, but we don't have to go. But like, let's say like, high school educated, making 50 grand a year or something like that versus white men in power, like any graduating class of Yale or something like that, right? Like just a bunch of smiling white male faces. Like those are two very different cases of the great white male. And the ones at the top don't like the ones at the bottom, let's say.
So there's an interesting dichotomy there that the more work I did on this topic, the more I had to start developing a language around those of us with conditional privilege and those of us with what I call absolute privilege. And I call it absolute privilege because if any one of us said, I grab women by the pussy, we would not get elected president.
I know I wouldn't.
I would be dead. So
yeah, I mean, in addition to other implications,
right?
But so there are definitely people who have, and maybe it's not totally absolute, but it's damn near absolute privilege, and there are the rest of us who have conditional privilege. And one of the aspects of conditional privilege that points back to the control whiteness that when Torian said that, I was like, oh, damn. Yeah. Is the condition, it's being conditionally privileged that allows us to be controlled by our system that we quote unquote benefit from. So yes, we have some male privilege and some white privilege, but most of us instead respond constantly from a fear of losing that privilege. I'm afraid of losing my man card. That's the one that we hear a lot, right? I wear skirts. Like, it was amazing to, like, first off, I can't tell you what it's like to wear a skirt for the first time. It was like being comfortable for the first time ever. It was amazing. But there was very much for me an acknowledgement that my man card was in danger when I started doing that. And it's not year round because they're not coming winter, just for the record. It's too damn cold. But during the summer, and I live in Albuquerque, I'm in a desert. Desert people the world over, men wear skirts because they're more comfortable. So that for me was like this very real wrestling with the man card that I think is very indicative of the problem. If we have something to lose, if we think we have something to lose, then our privilege is conditional. And that's the way it operates for most of us. We think we've bought in, we have bought into the zero-sum game or the win-lose scenario that Pat was mentioning. I think you're absolutely right. And the notion of the great white male, I basically started to string together all the descriptions of this person, right? Because he's cisgendered, he's heteronormed, he's middle class, he's high school or college educated. He's, you go right down the list of like every fucking commercial that has one of us drinking a Bud Light in it. And that's who we're supposed to be. And ageism is going to be in there too, because the white male is supposed to be a certain age. That's one of the reasons, Pat, I was so glad that you were willing to have this conversation, because like this privilege shifts throughout time in the age of our lives. So what I came up with was the notion that while we'll talk about this guy as white and we'll talk about this guy as a guy, we tend to lump all the rest of those things, the hetero, the cisgendered, the how much money he's supposed to be making, all that stuff, we lump it together. So I just lumped it into the term great white male, in part to kind of play on the words, because great white whale, all right, that's a thing. And there's a little bit of truth in the fact that this thing is killing us all. So we need to do away with the system. But I think, Pat, you're exactly right. Like, we've bought into the notion that we have something to lose instead of looking at what we have to gain. And instead of looking at, this doesn't mean somebody has to have power over us, because what I'm looking at with killing the great white male is killing the system of privilege, period. All throughout our history over the last 60, 70 years now, the women's lib movement was about trying to get the power of the white man. The civil rights movement was about trying to get the power of the white man. The anti-homophobic movement is about trying to get the power of the white man. And I'm saying, fuck the power of the white man. This is bullshit. The whole thing needs to come down, and we need to start being able to relate as human beings. That requires a totally different way of operating that I don't think we've imagined, because it's not a zero-sum game then.
But if I'm winning in what exists right now, what's my impetus to change? Okay.
We're not winning, though.
Tell me more.
Like, okay. Sorry.
I'm kind of prompting you with that one.
No, that's
so. I mean, so here's the thing: when sociologists study white men, they come up with some very clear things. So let's, Pat, do you want to talk about lonely, or the pressure to succeed, or what it's like to have to provide?
Well, yeah, I have from the very beginning, when I got out of high school and going to college, the emphasis was that I was to be the provider. And it was at that particular time, which is 69, 70 or 1970, women were not as much in the workforce as they are now. So I took on the responsibility of whatever we were going to earn, whatever the household was going to gain. That was my responsibility. I quickly thought that it would really make a lot of sense if my wife worked too. So I encouraged her to get a degree and become a teacher. And so we were both teaching at the same time, because even at that time, one person teaching salary was not enough to make it. So we had to have two. But that was kind of sharing the responsibility of being the provider. But there was no question from my upbringing and expectation that it was me. I was the guy, and because I was the guy, I was to be the provider. So, being kind of clever, I just tried to diffuse that and make it a joint thing, something that we as a couple would do, and it worked out.
Yeah.
But
Mike,
go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to ask Mike kind of a follow-up question for him. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask if you see a relationship in where, let's say, it's like a stay-at-home dad and the wife is the breadwinner. Like, does subconsciously do you see this guy as less of a man? Let's take whiteness out of
So
the
as a homemaker,
Mhm.
because I am a homemaker, I have been for 10 plus years, I guess 13, 14 years now.
Mhm.
Yes, it absolutely shifts things.
Right.
Because I noticed that even though homemaking is my primary profession, it's the thing that I spend the most of my week on. When I introduce myself to other men, and especially white men, that is the last thing that I talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do say, and so I have bluntly like very bluntly tried to lead with it, been like, I'm going to introduce myself as a homemaker, and men just don't even know what to say to it. It just gets ignored, gets totally ignored. Oh, I'm a homemaker. Oh, what kind of beer are we having tonight? Like, it's literally that kind of a just like like, so yeah, it's a thing.
Well, I mean, I personally, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, what's weird about it is, even though this is an arrangement that Sarah and I have very deliberately crafted, like, and has caused us issues over the years that we've had to work out, right? It isn't an accident. It was on purpose. And she's had to explain to me over and over again, no, I really need you in the home. I need you supporting me emotionally. I need that presence from you. And that means we need to make sure that you're the homemaker. And I wanted to do it too. So it's not like she was making me do that and nothing like that. But wow, I just had to, okay, well, my reaction there says something. But every time we've bumped into money problems, I freak out because I'm supposed to be providing. Like, and that pressure for me, and you said, I was like, holy shit, how do I forget about that? Like, that's very definitely a thing. Like, anytime we bump into trouble, oh man, it hits hard.
But don't you think that even a woman in that role, when there's financial problems, would almost have that same kind of, should I be going to work, or do I need to do this or something like that? So it's not totally, I mean, I think it's exacerbated by being a male, but yes. I think it's also something that, a couple trying to solve a problem would kind of, work through,
it's really important to acknowledge that when we're talking about the human animal, there's endless amounts of variety, right? Like, we have a variety of reactions to any given situation. Absolutely. Yes. When you look at the sociological studies of specifically white men, that becomes very obvious that it is a pressure that kills us. It's it is literally the thing that kills us.
How so?
It's stress linked to heart disease. There's one factor. Every time there's a depression, white male suicides go through the roof. Like, our identity, our ability to exist without feeling like we are capable of being the provider is at stake when that happens. The Mike, I see you nodding. What do you?
I was going to say the same thing. Like, what are you thinking with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's something that I grapple with, because it's like, when I envision, it's like, what do you want to do with your life? The first thing that comes to mind isn't like, oh, I want to slave at my desk until I die. Yeah, that sounds awesome, right? Like, I don't feel primarily motivated by that. Like, I want a boat, right? So, like, oftentimes I feel, even though I check all the boxes of, like, the great white male, I feel completely alienated from that person, from that stereotype.
Say more.
So, like, I don't want to be, sound like I'm lazy or anything, but it's like, I want to enjoy myself. I want to enjoy my life and, like, live a rich and fulfilling life with, like, amazing relationships and, fun stuff. Obviously, like, having money and even, like, sort of status in society is important, but I don't feel, like, sometimes it's like, am I hungry, or and that's why I work, or because, like, I want my neighbors to, like, not look at me weird, and they're like, what's he doing with the vacuum cleaner? Like.
So how does that value on relationships rather than status show up for you? And honestly, what's it like? Like, how do you talk to other white men about that?
Yeah, I think, well, we've kind of moved around a bunch. So now, like, let's say my social circuit is much smaller than it used to be, right? When I was single without a kid and stuff, like, lots of friends, always something going on. But now that it's like, I'm on family man mode, my social circuit is very closed off. So it's like, I have a Chinese wife, I have a mixed blood kid. Most of the kids that hang out in our neighborhood are brown kids. So it's like, we just hang out and have a good time together, right? And especially during coronavirus and stuff, we're all just sort of stuck together. So it's really about, let's just enjoy this time that we have together and like, create some good vibes and good memories. And to that, maybe not go off a little bit of tangent, but I've been stuck in this, like on my block during coronavirus, and my garage has turned into the kids' like play zone. Like all the little neighborhood kids are all quarantined, and like 75% of them are Indian, and then like Latin, and like my kid's the only white kid, and he's even like just half white. So I get to see this little microcosm of colors of the world all playing together, and none of the stuff we're talking about matters at all. It doesn't enter that environment at all. It's zero. It's irrelevant. It's stupid. So like I get to see these like really wonderful little kids just being kids, just playing, and like none of the stuff even matters. One of the kids has 2 thumbs, and nobody cares. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He's just nice and he's fun to be around. So like that's what we're going for, right? So it's like just the problem with the great white male is that he needs to just like not take himself so seriously. Be a kid again. Relax a little bit,
I mean, you're exactly right. Like that's one of the arguments that I make is that we had these things as young people, but gradually over the years, what happens is they get cut off for us. And so that for me is what killing the great white male actually is. It's about recovering the parts of ourselves that we have let go in order to accept the mantle of great white male. And it's making the argument that we can do that, number one. And number two, we have a lot to gain from it. What would it be like to relate to my friend with 2 thumbs as my friend Mike?
Well, and
instead of my black friend or my, blah, 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 and all that other shit that we put on people.
Yes. I mean, you guys know me well. I mean, I'm at the center of all of that. It would be nice, but that's not how it is.
Yeah.
and a lot of people will say, it is conditioned. Like, I mean, we've talked about this for years, man. I mean, we show up different, but you and I show up different, but we also have to acknowledge that in the greater world, some people are not able to or willing to bridge the gap and have those types of relationships. Right. And that's like my life's purpose in trying to motivate these types of people, because to me, it's that simple, but that's how I've always shown up. You know what I'm saying? And I've also had my own privilege, being a male. My parents work, so I grew up in different environments and stuff. But I still think that I know it's possible. So I just want to spark that in people. So that's why this conversation is so important to me.
These things are muscles. They grow if we exercise them. And when we talk about white men, we are on the demographic studies that are done. We are the loneliest demographic. We have the fewest meaningful relationships. Even though we might have a lot of friends, having a conversation about race with our friends, for example, would be very difficult for many of us, or impossible. Having a conversation about my child has cancer would be very difficult. Like that kind of stuff. We just don't have those kinds of personal support networks. And that's our ability to be intimate is directly related to our ability to be vulnerable, our ability to be wrong, our willingness to try things and those are all things that we get cut off from as we grow up into the white male system. And that's, Mike, I love that example. Like, you guys are great. your examples of this shit are so perfect because it gets stripped away from us. We're all born this way, and it gradually gets stripped away from us by a system that wants us to be controllable, that wants us to be predictable, that wants us to be marketable. All of these other things that our system needs from us. And it's terrible for us too. Yeah, we do gain conditional privilege out of it. Yep, you get a man card, but what we lose is our ourselves, and we have to come up with ways of recovering it. And you guys sound like you've got bits of it here and there, and that's what I'm looking for. Like, that's absolutely it. That's the shit we got to learn to create more widely, and we got to talk about as white men. I think, at least.
I agree. That's my assertion. Patrick, Mike, you guys have any last words as we kind of finish off? We like to finish off this segment where we can offer any type of advice, thoughts, insight on how do we show up being more, being better, or even being a little bit different. So anything you'd like to add to that would be wonderful.
Sure. To the husbands, new and old out there, do the dishes. You'll thank me later.
Yeah.
There you go.
Whoever your mate is really important in this process. But I really do think that you need to be just a little introspective and mindful of yourself, and try to continue a learning process. And I think that's really important. So.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We definitely appreciate it. Stay tuned because, we got to do our after party. We're going to put you in the green room for right now. Thank you guys so much for showing up on Where's Your Heart. We appreciate it. Okay?
Okay.
All right. All right, man.
I'm always amazed at how fast a fucking hour goes. What is this?
I know. Well, that's what happens when we're centered around vulnerability. We're coming in real.
Oh, we didn't. There's so much more we got to talk about. It's so awesome.
We're having those radical candor conversations around real things, the things that people get so frustrated about and can't talk about at work, and then come home and can't talk about it and can't talk about it with a therapist or whatever else. So that's good, man. Hopefully our listeners and everyone got something from it, and we will be continuing a lot of this on Where's Your Heart, man. So this is your baby. So I'm going to let you close this one out, my man. You got to close this out strong too, because we got to come back to this topic. A whole lot more we have to cover.
Oh, I'm so glad and so thankful. Like there's so many aspects to it. I think that's part of what I love about the interview it's the conversation process. Like Mike's just very authentic. Like, I don't see this when we see the kids playing. I'm like, yes,
that's my dude, man. That's my dude.
Fucking nailed it. Like, cause that's what part of the thing I've been writing from is that this stuff gets stripped away as we put on the mask or we try to fit into the mold. I just released the logo today for Killing the Great White Male, which is right now just a podcast. I'm in the midst of writing a book. But check that podcast out, Killing the Great White Male. But that logo has a paper doll on it because it's like, it's not real. And the heart is missing because that's what's missing for us when we try to live into this thing. It doesn't work. So yeah, thank you for asking the question and for holding the space for this, Torian.
Hey man, listen, we get modeling, bro. That's part of it, man. We got to model it. It means nothing if we say we're about it and we're not living it when it's tough. So
that's true.
All right, man. Well,
and we're gonna end on time-ish.
We're gonna end on time, and we got a closing argument with Robert Wilson. This was an interesting discussion. Thank you, Robert. We appreciate you chiming in. And yes, that's what we try to intend, to have this,
Yeah.
All right, man. One in the can. Let's head to the after party. Thank you everyone for listening, for viewing Where's Your Heart, and see you next week. Peace.
Thank you all.